Si è svolta presso l'Istituto Italiano di Cultura di Miami una conferenza dedicata alla figura di San Francesco d'Assisi, in occasione dell'ottavo centenario della sua morte. L'incontro, dal titolo Everyone's Saint, Francis of Assisi in American Cultures, è stato tenuto dalla professoressa Patricia Appelbaum, autrice del volume San Francis of America, How a 13th Century Friar Became American Post-Popular Saint, in cui analizza il modo in cui la figura di San Francesco si è affermata e trasformata nel contesto culturale degli Stati Uniti.
How has the image of Saint Francis changed in American culture over time?
It's changed greatly in American culture over time. First, in Spanish America, it was imported largely by Franciscan missionaries and took on some of the attributes of indigenous cultures as indigenous people, became converts, but also brought their own imagery and their own understanding of practices in relation to holy figures. In Protestant America, especially Anglo-America, Francis, before the 19th century, Francis was hardly known, and saints were not venerated. The Roman Catholic Church was understood to be in error and corrupted and less than true Christianity. Symbolism was not highly regarded. Protestantism tended to be very plain and very treat symbols very minimally. All of this, as Protestants became more exposed to Catholicism because of various historical changes, and also to Europe as travel became more widely, more possible for more people, and as people studied European art and music, they encountered imagery of the saints in various ways. They began to see the appeal of other religious ways than their own. They also began to take an interest in Gothic architecture and other things that they had previously rejected. The earliest attitude of Protestants accepting Francis was treating him as a sort of proto-Protestant, a sort of forerunner of the Reformation, because he charted his own individual path and he emphasized mission and preaching, which is perfectly true. That's just not all there is to Francis. He became known as a forerunner of Dante and a forerunner of Renaissance art through the work of Giotto. He was especially embraced as a perfect mirror of Jesus, as someone who did what Jesus did, which was a goal of Protestants who were biblically oriented. They had never before thought of seeing this in a holy figure, in a saint. He took on, along with that, a good deal of meaning in social reform and social change, sometimes anti-capitalism, sometimes progressive era social change. Depression era, again, it was another moment. The peace movement of the 20th century embraced him as a pacifist, and again, there's warrant for that in the writings we have about Francis. So particularly in the Great Peace Movement of the 1920s and the kind of rearguard action of the 1930s and the move into active nonviolence, Francis was invoked as a hero. At the same time, we have the emerging Francis in the garden as a figure of nature and connected with birds and the natural world. This, again, has a long precedent, particularly in Giotto's image of Francis with the birds. But it takes on a particular valence in the 20s and 30s. Garden statuary begins to appear. Francis then becomes a figure of the natural world of quiet withdrawal and meditation, and he is connected with birds because the imagery of Francis holding a bird takes hold during that mid-century period. We don't see very much of that before. In the 1950s, he is both a figure of the conventional mainstream culture and a figure of dissent. In the 1960s, he is regarded as the original hippie by many people because of his rebellion against conventional society and against wealth. As I said, he becomes associated with the environmental movement in its early years and the first Earth Day of 1970. And we then move into his association with animals, and more recently his association with contact with Muslims, because he reached out to a Muslim leader during a crusade trying to make peace, and numerous other ways in which he's starting to surface in postmodern American culture. So he has been seen in many different ways, most of which are warranted in the documents, but most of which are also partial. And I think they respond to the needs and circumstances of Americans seeking spiritual leadership and spiritual examples.
Do you think St. Francis still has something powerful to say to younger generations today?
Of course he does, yes. I would not venture to say how people should interpret Francis, but I think our movement of intensive emphasis on capitalism and acquisition and the building of wealth should at least be questioned and challenged. I think that Francis is also a figure who crosses many boundaries, as we've seen in American culture, Catholic and Protestant and non-religious boundaries, and I think that is a value well worth pursuing. He valued community, and I think this is also a strong message as our society becomes more fragmented. I certainly agree that his association with the natural world is very important. There are many ways to interpret that, but I think it should not be lost sight of again as we become more electronic and industrialized and distanced from the natural world. I think this is an aspect of Francis that deserves attention, especially as we face some serious environmental dangers.
Al centro del lectio, San Francesco come simbolo universale di pace, dialogo e cultura del creato, capace di parlare a credenti e non credenti e di attraversare confini religiosi, sociali e culturali. Un appuntamento che si inserisce nel calendario delle iniziative culturali dell'Istituto Italiano di Cultura di Miami, confermandone il ruolo di ponte tra la tradizione italiana e il dibattito culturale internazionale.